Imagine waking with a fever that was not there when you fell asleep. By morning, your neck is swollen. Dark lumps appear beneath the skin. They grow fast. They burn. Within 3 days, you are dead. Your family follows within the week. Your neighbors within the month. Your entire city within the season. This happened across an entire continent. In less than 5 years, half of Europe simply ceased to exist. This is the story of the Black Death, the deadliest event in recorded history, and how it changed everything. To understand the catastrophe, you must first see what it destroyed. The early 14th century was a golden age. Europe's population had doubled over 200 years. Cities were expanding far beyond their ancient walls. London, Paris, Florence, and Venice were dense and chaotic. Thriving centers of commerce, culture, and ambition. Gothic cathedrals were rising across the continent, monuments to a civilization that believed it was favored by God. The harvest had been generous for generations thanks to unusually warm and stable weather across the continent. And the world was connected in ways it had never been before. Trade routes stretched from China to England. The Mongol Empire had unified Central Asia. A merchant in Italy could buy silk that crossed an entire continent. Spices, gold, knowledge, and technology flowed along these routes at speeds the ancient world never imagined. But these same roads that carried wealth would soon carry something else. Something no wall could stop. The origin of the disaster lay thousands of miles from Europe, in the vast grasslands of Central Asia. Here, deep in the soil, lived a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. It had existed for thousands of years. It lived inside burrowing rodents, marmots, and ground squirrels, passed between them by fleas, a closed ecosystem. For centuries, it stayed contained. The steppes were vast and empty. Humans rarely crossed paths with the carriers. Then in the 1330s, the climate shifted. Drought destroyed food sources. Rodent populations collapsed and migrated. Starving animals moved closer to human settlements along the Silk Road. Their fleas jumped to new hosts. The first human infections appeared in remote trading posts. Fever, vomiting, swollen glands that turned black. Rumors of a devastating plague in the East began reaching European merchants in the early 1340s. Traders spoke of entire regions emptied overnight. Cities in India and Mesopotamia abandoned. Populations simply vanished. Europeans listened with distant horror. These were faraway tragedies in foreign lands. Surely nothing that could reach them. They were wrong. The plague was already moving westward, following the exact trade routes that made Europe rich. The critical moment came at a fortress city called Caffa on the northern shore of the Black Sea. Caffa was a Genoese trading colony, massively fortified, the bridge between Asian overland routes and European sea trade. In 1346, the city was besieged by a Mongol army. Thousands of soldiers camped outside its walls. Then the plague arrived in the Mongol camp. Soldiers started dropping by the hundreds. The siege was falling apart. In desperation, the commander ordered the corpses of infected soldiers catapulted over the city walls into Caffa. Diseased bodies crashed into rooftops and market squares, the first known act of biological warfare in history. The Genoese panicked. Wealthy merchants loaded their families onto ships and fled the harbor toward the Mediterranean. Those ships carried more than refugees. Rats hid in the cargo holds. Fleas lived on the rats. Messina in Sicily was the first European city struck. When the ships arrived, the sailors were already dying. Dock workers who boarded the vessels found corpses rotting on deck. Survivors were delirious and covered in black sores. Authorities ordered the ships expelled from the port, but it was too late. The rats had reached the docks. Within weeks, Messina collapsed entirely. The infection spread faster than anyone could possibly comprehend or contain. From Sicily, the plague leapt to the Italian mainland. Genoa fell, then Venice, then Florence, one after another. Venice tried to fight back. Ships were forced to anchor offshore for 40 days before entering the city. The word for that waiting period was quarantina. It became quarantine, a concept born entirely from desperation. From the coast, the plague moved inland, along rivers, along roads, following every path that connected human beings. When it reached the great cities of Europe, the killing accelerated beyond anything the world had ever seen. Medieval cities were dense, streets were narrow, houses stacked on each other. Sunlight barely reached the ground. Open sewers ran through the center of every road. Rats lived in the walls. Fleas covered every surface. These cities were vibrant and rich, but also perfect breeding grounds for a disease that fed on density. Florence may have lost 60% of its population. The writer Boccaccio watched his city die around him. He described fathers abandoning sick sons, wives leaving husbands to die alone, the bonds of family dissolved by terror, courts closed, markets shut, bakeries stopped producing bread. The machinery of civilization simply ground to a halt. The sounds of a living city disappeared. No merchants calling, no carts on the cobblestones, only silence. Until the bell ringers themselves died. And then there was nothing but the wind through the empty streets. Bodies piled faster than anyone could bury them. Massive trenches were dug. The dead stacked in layers. The dead were covered with thin soil. Well, there was no time for ceremony, no time left for prayer. The doctors of the 14th century had no understanding of bacteria or contagion as we know it. Their treatments made everything worse. They told people not to bathe. They bled patients who were already dying. They cut open the swollen buboes hoping to drain the poison. It only spread the infection faster. Aromatic herbs were burned on street corners to purify the air. Doctors wore long robes soaked in vinegar. Nothing worked. Every attempt to stop the plague failed completely. And this failure broke something deep inside people. In the medieval world, there was no separation between the physical and the spiritual. Disease meant divine punishment. People flooded into churches. They prayed in massive crowds. Packed together, they only spread the disease faster. When prayers failed and priests died alongside sinners, a terrifying conclusion took hold. God was not listening. Bands of flagellants appeared across northern Europe. Hundreds of men marching from town to town in matching robes. Twice daily, they stripped to the waist and whipped themselves bloody with iron-tipped scourges in the public square. They believed their suffering might appease God. Instead, they carried the plague with them from city to city. As desperation grew, so did the need for someone to blame. Reason gave way to fear and hatred. Jewish communities were accused of poisoning the wells of Christian cities, a conspiracy theory born from terror. Despite the Pope condemning these accusations, massacres erupted across Europe. Entire communities were burned alive in public. The plague was not only an urban disaster. 90% of Europe's population lived in the countryside. Thousands of small villages were wiped out completely. Their names are lost to history. Their stories gone forever. Harvests rotted in the fields because no one remained to gather them. Livestock wandered aimlessly and turned feral. Wolves grew bold in the absence of humans. The wild was returning. Nature was reclaiming the landscape. The carefully managed countryside of medieval Europe was being swallowed back by forest, grassland, and silence. By 1350, the plague had reached Scotland, Scandinavia, and the remote Norse colonies on Greenland. By 1351, the first wave finally burned itself out. The bacterium had run out of victims. The survivors emerged into a world that looked the same, but was fundamentally and permanently different. Between 75 and 200 million people died across Eurasia and North Africa. The numbers are staggering. In Europe alone, roughly half the population was gone. Entire generations erased in less than 5 years. But from the ashes, something unexpected emerged. The massive death toll had created a severe labor shortage. For the first time in centuries, the common laborer held power. Lords competed for workers with higher wages. The rigid structures of serfdom cracked. In many places, they broke entirely. A new economic world was forming. Art changed forever. The dance of death became the defining image. Skeletons dragging kings and peasants into the earth. No single event has scarred Western civilization more deeply than the Black Death. It exposed the fragility of everything, while the society that rebuilt from the ruins was harder, more skeptical, and more willing to question old certainties. The path of death had cleared the ground. What grew from it, slowly and painfully, was the modern world.